I didn't touch the eviction notice. I just slid the 1918 senior water rights deed across the table and watched the entire $40 million Cascadian Heights luxury development instantly lose its municipal water connection. They called it the Riverbend Preserve and thought they could steal my family's homestead while I was debriefing in the Philippines. These corporate overlords built their glass and steel mountain retreat on a $1925 land claim, oblivious to the fact that my great-grandfather's deed held the oldest, most powerful water right in the entire valley. They thought an HOA eviction notice was the final word. What they didn't know? I'm an ex-Navy SEAL combat engineer, and my $1935 diversion dam has the legal right to claim every drop of water that flows through their manicured lawns. The audacity was breathtaking, until the old siphon pumps started turning and their sparkling new community pool turned into a dust bowl. This wasn't going to be merely satisfying. This was going to be a legal, tactical, and environmental masterpiece. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. You're about to witness the ultimate Western water law takedown involving a century-old deed, a secret underground reservoir, and the sweet, sweet sound of justice flowing back to the land. You didn't know I was the judge, the engineer, and the sheriff. My name is Ethan Ghost Kaelin, 38 years old, former Navy SEAL, and fourth-generation inheritor of the Last Chance Ranch, 65 acres of rough but prime agricultural land at the foothills of the Cascades Mountains in eastern Washington. My great-grandfather, who we all called Papa Eli, bought this parcel back in 1918 when this area was little more than a logging and cattle outpost. Papa Eli wasn't a wealthy man, but he understood the absolute value of water in the West. In 1935, with the help of a local hydrologist, he constructed a small diversion weir and a complex network of irrigation ditches to water his grazing lands and for basic homestead use. It wasn't a massive structure, but it was legally filed under the West's powerful doctrine of prior appropriation, granting my family the senior water right to the Tassel River, a tributary of the Wenatchee River. During my 2 tours with the Navy SEALs, I specialized in environmental operations and underground logistics engineering. Building clean water infrastructure in combat zones and managing scarce water flow in arid environments teaches you one thing: water is the ultimate power, and people will kill for it fast. While I was deployed on my last rotation, Papa Eli passed away. The ranch went into a trust managed by my well-meaning but utterly overwhelmed Aunt Beatrice, a literature professor in Boston. She, with her good intentions but zero knowledge of Washington state land and water law, hired a local management company called Peakview Trust. She believed that automatic property tax payments were sufficient. This was the fatal mistake. Enter our antagonist, Cassandra Cassie Vance, 45, president of the HOA for the $40 million luxury retreat, the Cascadian Heights. A former corporate lawyer for Amazon, she transitioned her boardroom aggression into suburban control. She drives a white Tesla Model X and treats high-end yoga wear like business attire. Cassie possesses that particular brand of calculated tech elite sweetness, the kind of woman who smiles while stabbing you in the back and somehow makes it sound like a networking opportunity. Her husband, Bradford Brad Vance, is a real estate developer and an influential member of the Chelan County Planning Commission. That relationship is the nexus of her unethical power. I returned home in July 2024, expecting to see the old grazing fields and hear the familiar rush of water in Papa Eli's irrigation network. Instead, I found construction crews, concrete mixers, and survey stakes scattered across the river bend. The 25 acres Papa Eli always said was unsaleable because it held the key to the water rights. The feel of the dirt under my boots was different, harder, angrier. I confronted the construction foreman. "Sorry, pal," he said, not looking sorry at all. "We got all the permits. This is Cascadian Heights property now." I called the sheriff. Deputy Davies showed up and explained, with obvious discomfort, that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim based on my extended absence and alleged abandonment of the land. It's an antiquated law designed to prevent land from sitting empty forever, but it's become a favorite tool of developers. That's when Cassie appeared. She didn't ride up in a golf cart. She walked with the polished certainty of someone who owns everything in sight. Her voice was pure, calculated saccharine. "Your family abandoned this land, darling," she said, flashing a blinding fake smile. "We're just putting it to its highest and best use for the community." What truly sent my blood to a boil wasn't the loss of land. It was the illegal stream diversion. Her crews had built a temporary rock and earth dam to redirect the Tassel River to the opposite side of the valley, away from my senior irrigation system and straight into Cascadian Heights' complex water filtration plant. The water level in my historic ditches was dropping every single day. $80 years of careful water management undone in 3 weeks. As I stood there watching the stolen water, Cassie's parting shot echoed in my ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, sailor. Western land doesn't wait for those who are absent." That was the moment I knew this was not merely a property dispute. This was a war over water rights, and I would fight it with every legal and engineering tool the military had ever taught me. I made the first boneheaded mistake of a civilian returning to a legal battle. I hired an overpriced Seattle real estate lawyer. This guy, all silk tie and city anxiety, quoted me $120,000 just to file preliminary motions challenging the zoning change. He shuffled papers, billed hours, and talked about discovery like it was a foreign language. He was utterly detached from the fundamental realities of Western land law, which, unlike city zoning, is written in water and blood. I quickly fired him. My Navy SEAL combat engineering and logistics training kicked in. When you're faced with a seemingly impenetrable enemy defense, whether it's a network of IEDs or a corrupt bureaucratic system, you don't attack the surface. You find the breach in the foundation. My objective shifted from hiring legal help to conducting a full-spectrum legal and engineering reconnaissance. The federal connection. The Army Corps and USGS. My first target was the Chelan County Records Office, a dusty basement archive where the real history of the valley slept. In Afghanistan, we called digging through enemy intelligence finding the needle in the stack of needles. Here, the needle was Papa Eli's original $1935 weir and irrigation ditch construction permits. These weren't just local filings. Papa Eli, a man who barely finished 8th grade, understood leveraging federal resources. The permits showed he worked directly with the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, and even received design consultation from the then newly formed Army Corps of Engineers, USAC, for watershed management and flood control. This was the critical discovery, the first power punch. Any water control structure, dam, or diversion built with USAC consultation, or involving federal agencies like the USGS for flood control or resource management, immediately establishes federal jurisdiction. A local Homeowners Association, HOA, has absolutely no authority to unilaterally dismantle, divert, or obstruct a structure under federal purview. Local zoning laws and ordinances are rendered secondary. The Tassel River weir was not just my property. It was federally acknowledged watershed infrastructure. The adrenaline surge I felt was familiar. The clear, cold certainty of having found the tactical advantage. This wasn't a civil property dispute anymore. This was a direct violation of federal water law and potentially USAS regulations. The senior water right, the $1918 deed, but the deep dive continued. While I was cross-referencing Papa Eli's name with USAC files, I stumbled upon a brittle, beautifully preserved senior water rights certificate from $1918, filed by my great-grandfather Elijah Kaelin in the American West. Water rights are governed by the doctrine of prior appropriation, often summarized as first in time, first in right. This $1918 deed wasn't just old. It was the senior most registered right for the entire Tassel River watershed. This is the second power punch, the tactical nuke of Western law. I didn't just own the land where the water flowed. I owned the right to the first drop of that water before anyone else in the valley, including the city, and crucially, Cascadian Heights. These rights were older than the county's municipal water system, older than the town of Leavenworth, and decades older than every piece of legal fiction Brad Vance and Cassie had manufactured. They weren't just attempting adverse possession of my land. They were committing senior water theft, a legal offense that borders on agricultural terrorism in this region. The realization fueled my fury. They hadn't just insulted my family. They had violated a fundamental sacred tenet of Western survival. Cassie's propaganda and my documentation protocol, while I was operating in the shadows of the courthouse. Cassie was operating in the daylight of the news cycle. She amplified her victimhood, organizing an emergency HOA meeting about my dangerous, unstable structure. I watched her on the evening news, a perfect picture of concerned affluence. "We are simply terrified for our children," she lamented, dabbing her eyes. "That dam looks ready to burst and we have millions of dollars of homes, families." Right downstream, it was classic information warfare, preemptive framing to turn the true victim, me, into the aggressor, the unstable veteran. What the local news failed to mention was that my weir, built with federal guidance, had just passed its required structural inspection. She escalated her campaign on the neighborhood app next door, posting veiled threats about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals. This tactic, known as neighbor shaming, was designed to isolate me and justify their future harassment campaigns. I countered with the only tool a professional can rely on: meticulous, verifiable documentation, surveillance. I installed military-grade, encrypted trail cameras along my property perimeter and at all points of the illegal diversion. Time-stamped evidence. I took time-stamped, geotagged photographs of the illegal rock earth dam and the diminishing water levels in Papa Eli's irrigation ditch, establishing a clear timeline of the water theft. Flow measurement. Using basic hydrology tools, I began measuring the flow rate at the diverted section and the original section, quantifying the exact volume of water being stolen on a daily basis. The EPA tip-off, the crunch of fresh gravel under my boots every evening, placed there by the invaders, was a constant reminder of the ticking clock. They were fast-tracking construction to beat any legal injunction. This is when I called my former SEAL teammate, Tony Russo, who had transitioned into the EPA Enforcement Division specializing in Clean Water Act compliance. Our conversation was swift and professional. "Tony, they diverted a tributary of the Wenatchee. No permits, no assessments. And my weir has USACE input." Tony's response was sharp. "Ethan, if it's a natural waterway, and they diverted it without federal permits, that is a violation of the Clean Water Act, CWA, Section 404. And since your weir is federally acknowledged infrastructure, any obstruction or unlawful diversion is interference with federal interests. The fines for CWA violations start at $75,000 per day, per violation." His confirmation was the final piece of the tactical puzzle. I was no longer fighting a zoning board. I was building a federal criminal case against Cassie and Brad Vance. This wasn't just about land or money anymore. It was about Papa Eli's legacy, a man who respected the law of the West and the life-giving force of water. They were destroying $80 years of conservation, turning my family's agricultural right into a backyard amenity. As I measured the dwindling water flow, I vowed that this would not end in a negotiated settlement. This would end with absolute, undeniable justice, delivered through the superior application of law and engineering. Cassie Vance, the former corporate attorney, didn't understand water law, but she excelled at the corporate playbook. Overwhelm the target with process, paper, and public opinion until they capitulate. Having failed to intimidate me with basic eviction notices, she escalated the battle to a full spectrum. Multi-agency assault, coordinated by her husband Brad Vance, through his city council influence. The neighborhood watch. Psychological warfare. Cassie's initial move was a campaign of psychological harassment designed to isolate me and erode my credibility in the community. She organized her neighborhood safety patrol, 3 HOA board members in matching pristine polo shirts, who set up a rotating $24-hour surveillance post at the entrance to my family's private gravel road. They weren't just observing. They were implementing textbook intimidation tactics, continuous documentation. They photographed every vehicle that came and went, recording license plates and filing detailed, often fictitious, reports of suspicious activity with the local sheriff's office. Petty citations. They weaponized the HOA rules. I received citations for my perfectly functional 80-year-old farmhouse, deemed an unsightly structure that violated the community's aesthetic standards. They complained about the excessive noise of my antique tractor running during working hours, claiming it disrupted the quiet enjoyment of their multi-million-dollar properties. The slander campaign. Cassie continued her media blitz, but she shifted her focus from the land to my character. She used the pervasive toxicity of the Nextdoor app to spread rumors about my unstable mental state and unpredictable aggression due to my military service. This was a classic attempt to preemptively dismiss any legal claim I might make by painting me as a troubled veteran seeking revenge. The wellness check, the cruelest blow. Most calculated and personal attack came when Brad Vance weaponized his official connections to target my history. Utilizing his position on the Planning Commission and his contacts in state bureaucracy, he requested a mandatory wellness check on me through the Department of Veterans Services. The logic was chillingly effective. If they could officially document me as struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or unable to manage my affairs, they could use that finding in court to argue I was not mentally competent to manage a complex property like a ranch with federal water infrastructure. A sympathetic but obligated VA social worker, Ms. Anya Sharma, arrived at the ranch. She was kind but professional. She had a clipboard and boxes to check. I had to spend an hour navigating a conversation designed to analyze my mental state, all while knowing Cassie Vance was watching from the end of my driveway, positioned like a suburban warlord overseeing a military inspection. The sheer audacity of using my military service, my sacrifice, as a tool against me filled me with a cold, focused rage that was far more dangerous than any surface anger. The regulatory SWAT team, Operation Drown. The bureaucratic harassment reached its peak when Brad coordinated what felt like a full-scale regulatory siege. It was a classic squeeze play designed to create so many mandatory, expensive compliance issues that I would be financially forced to sell. One morning, the dust and heat were joined by the official vehicles of the county building inspector. The inspector, a known golf partner of Brad's, declared my $1945 farmhouse foundation structurally unsound and required an immediate $15,000 stabilization project before I could continue living there. Fire marshal cited my property for fire hazards related to dry brush, forcing me to invest in expensive clearing and fire mitigation services. Health department inspected my septic system, which had passed an inspection 6 months prior, and suddenly found minor leach field infractions, requiring a full $20,000 replacement within 30 days. Animal control, even they joined in, citing me for unsecured livestock, my grandfather's 3 aging longhorn steers, a violation that carried steep daily fines. The message was clear: comply with these $50,000 in sudden, arbitrary costs, or face escalating fines and public condemnation. They were trying to bleed me dry with bureaucratic red tape, the same tactic often used to pressure legitimate local officials into cooperation in less stable regions of the world. The counterattack, targeting environmental fraud, too can play the game. While they were drowning me in paperwork, I was setting up the real target. My conversation with Tony Russo at the EPA was paying dividends. I compiled all my photographic and flow rate documentation showing that the HOA had illegally diverted a federally acknowledged waterway, CWA violation, failed to file a required wetlands assessment. The Tassel River tributary fed into critical seasonal wetlands on my property, and any development impacting them required a federal Section 404 permit. The fines for this were astronomical. Tony confirmed that any development that touches natural waterways requires federal environmental clearance, even on private property in a state like Washington. The EPA's interest, once peaked, rarely subsided. The insurance fraud smoking gun, my deeper dive into the public record, revealed the true weakness in the HOA's armor. Insurance fraud. I discovered that the entire Cascadian Heights development was built in what the Army Corps of Engineers, USACA, had officially classified as a 100-year flood plain. Insurance companies initially refused to provide coverage until the HOA submitted a guaranteed flood mitigation plan. Their plan was a masterpiece of corporate deceit: permanently divert the Tassel River into my property's historical floodplain and claim the development site was now safe. This is the critical vulnerability. When developers lie about environmental risks, specifically flood risks, to secure multi-million-dollar coverage from major carriers, that constitutes federal mail fraud and wire fraud. This wasn't just a civil fine. This carried mandatory criminal penalties. It meant that I wasn't just fighting an HOA. I was uncovering a systemic criminal conspiracy that involved Brad Vance's construction company, the HOA, and potentially fraudulent insurance brokers. The potential penalties went from thousands of dollars in civil fines to years in federal prison. The pattern of abuse, the final piece of reconnaissance, confirmed that this was not a one-off attempt. Through online forums and local contacts, I found victims of Cassie's previous HOA in San Jose, California. They had faced an identical, meticulously planned stream diversion and hostile takeover that resulted in a $3.5 million EPA fine paid by that HOA. Cassie had simply fled the jurisdiction and set up the same scam here in Kaelin County. This pattern was the prosecutor's dream. It showed intent, malice, and a history of repeated federal environmental crime that followed her, regardless of state lines. As I stood on my property, the scent of fresh concrete curing in the August heat, a constant reminder of my ticking clock, I knew the stakes. Cassie and Brad were betting their future on my exhaustion and financial ruin, but they had underestimated the sheer patience and dedication of a veteran engineer who understood that the true power in a conflict isn't in the speed of the attack, but in the precision of the counterstrike. I was running out of time, but every hour spent documenting their fraud was an hour spent building an airtight case that would not just stop them, but destroy their entire financial and political ecosystem. While Cassie and Brad Vance invested their time and capital in isolating me, painting me as the unstable veteran disrupting progress, I recognized the central rule of asymmetrical warfare. If you cannot match their power, you must multiply yours. My single-man defense had yielded critical legal intel, but to execute the hydro-tactical operation, I needed a coalition. I had to turn their campaign of bureaucratic harassment into a community movement for justice. The network of victims, exposing the pattern. My first task was to break the isolation Brad and Cassie had enforced through fear and non-disclosure agreements. I systematically cross-referenced property records, zoning appeals, and local news archives, looking for others who had been targeted by their HOA or Brad's construction company, Vance Development. This was intelligence gathering, pure and simple. I discovered a chilling pattern. Cascadian Heights HOA was not a community. It was a land absorption machine. Over the past 4 years, they had successfully used tactics identical to those deployed against me. Arbitrary fines, zoning flips, and spurious legal actions to absorb 8 smaller, generational properties. Each time the victim either lacked the funds, the legal knowledge, or the emotional fortitude to fight back, leading to a cheap, forced sale that benefited Brad's construction schedule. I connected with several of these former property owners through obscure local farming forums and environmental groups. The stories were identical, providing the essential legal component for a future RICO Act, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, filing, a pattern of racketeering activity spanning multiple years and jurisdictions. Key allies. The faces of the stolen water. My coalition was built not on money, but on shared pain and deeply senior water rights. The Rodriguez family, senior agricultural rights, my elderly neighbors. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez were a cornerstone. Their family had run a renowned cherry and apple orchard on the lower Tassel River for 3 generations. Their farm, established in 1905, held the second most senior water rights in the entire watershed, just behind my 1918 deed. Since Cassie's crew illegally diverted the river, their orchard had suffered catastrophically. The lower branches withered, and their annual yield was reduced by 60%. Mr. Rodriguez, a man whose hands bore the marks of a lifetime spent working the land, provided irrefutable historical documentation, hand-drawn maps of the original river flow, decades of irrigation logs, and tearful testimony about his grandfather's struggle to secure those precious water rights. His moral authority in the community was unassailable. His involvement immediately legitimized my fight as one of agricultural preservation against corporate greed. Maria Chen, the voice of the displaced Maria. Chen was the sharpest and angriest of the displaced victims. Her family's organic flower farm, established in the 1940s Lars, had been rezoned into oblivion by Brad Vance 3 years prior. Her bitterness was productive. She had kept detailed files, including internal emails and unfiled zoning protests, providing an invaluable blueprint of Brad's bureaucratic corruption. Maria became my chief intelligence officer, utilizing her network of former employees and contacts in local government to monitor Brad Vance's movements and internal HOA communications. Her insights were crucial. They think the money gives them secrecy. but they leak like sieves when you know where to push. 3. Amanda Cross, the legal sharpshooter, the final and most crucial alliance was with Amanda Cross, an environmental lawyer specializing in pro bono water rights litigation for rural communities. She was exactly the opposite of the silk-tied attorney I had fired. Amanda was a legal sharpshooter, concise, focused, and utterly fearless when it came to challenging corporate overreach under federal environmental statutes. When I presented her with the combination of my senior water rights deed, the USACE-USGS federal jurisdiction documents, and the evidence of insurance and environmental fraud, her eyes lit up. "Ethan," she said, cutting straight to the core, "this isn't just a property dispute. This is a textbook Clean Water Act violation tied to systemic fraud. We don't need to fight their adverse possession claim in civil court. We hit them with federal environmental and banking law. We make the water a criminal offense." She formalized our coalition: the Tassel River Conservation Alliance, the Environmental Hammer, the Audubon Society, while the farmers provided the legal standing. The local Audubon Society and the Sierra Club provided the political and media leverage. I provided them with my documented evidence: the diminishing flow rates, the drying wetlands, and the environmental report confirming the near total loss of the protected Guadalupe bass population in the illegally diverted section of the river. The environmental angle was devastating. Federal law imposes severe penalties for the destruction of protected wildlife habitat. By framing the river diversion as an act of ecological destruction rather than just water theft, the alliance drew immediate national attention from environmental watchdogs. Their legal teams added immense pressure on the EPA to fast-track the federal investigation, preparing for the eminent domain showdown. The final crushing threat was the impending eminent domain hearing. Brad and Cassie had fast-tracked this legal maneuver, planning to seize my land in less than 2 weeks for public safety. They offered a laughably low $250,000 for a property valued at over $1.2 million. Amanda's strategy was brilliant. We would not fight the eminent domain claim on price. We would fight it on jurisdiction and legality. Jurisdiction challenge: argue that the city cannot condemn a property that is actively subject to an ongoing federal environmental investigation and is protected by USACE-USGS federal jurisdiction. Necessity challenge: argue that the supposed public safety hazard, my dam, was only rendered a hazard because of the HOA's illegal, fraudulent construction downstream in the 100-year flood zone. In short, they created the hazard to justify stealing the land. The countersuit preparation: simultaneously, Amanda drafted a massive civil RICO lawsuit, leveraging the evidence from the 8 displaced victims and the insurance fraud data. The moment the city moved to condemn the land, we would drop the RICO suit, targeting not just the HOA but Brad Vance's construction company and his personal assets. The hydro-tactical plan is finalized. As the construction noise rattled my windows, I finalized the engineering component: precise measurement. I meticulously measured the daily water loss, calculating the exact volume of 3.5 million gallons required to restore the river's original flow path. Functional test: under the cover of a minor evening storm, I conducted minimal flow tests of Papa Eli's 1935 hydraulic spillway gates. The hollow echo of water rushing through the long dormant channels was the sweetest sound I had heard in months. The system was fully functional. The justification: the construction crew's aggressive move to install permanent concrete barriers blocking the original riverbed provided the final legal justification. Amanda asserted that this action was an imminent, irreversible environmental catastrophe. This allowed us to frame the opening of the spillway as an emergency. Environmental restoration, a legal obligation under Papa Eli's $1935 covenant, and a necessary action to prevent further federal violations. The alliances were forged, the legal battle lines drawn, and the engineering solution finalized. The timing was now everything. The inevitable September rains were coming, and with them, the chance to execute a controlled, legal, and devastating counterstrike. The bureaucratic chaos orchestrated by Brad and Cassie Vance was nothing more than a smokescreen. While they were busy burying me in $50,000 worth of frivolous citations and legal threats, I was digging into the one place they thought was impenetrable: their finances and legal filings. My military training taught me that in a defensive siege, you don't fight the troops on the wall. You target the general's logistics. Here, the logistics were money and legal liability. The federal hammer falls, EPA, and the RICO threat my old SEAL buddy, Tony Russo, working in the EPA Enforcement Division, delivered the intel that instantly escalated the fight from a local land dispute to a federal criminal matter. Tony confirmed that the EPA had officially opened a federal investigation into the Tassel River diversions based on my initial complaint and meticulous documentation. This was the first seismic crack in their foundation. A local zoning board can ignore a rancher, but no city official or HOA president can ignore the EPA. But Tony's most valuable intel was the confirmation of Cassie Vance's prior bad acts. He confirmed that her previous HOA in San Jose, California, had paid a staggering $3.5 million EPA fine for an identical scheme, diverting a protected stream to benefit a new, flood-prone development. Ethan, federal environmental crimes follow the individual, Tony explained. The prior fine shows intent, knowledge, and a pattern of committing interstate environmental fraud. This isn't just a fine for Cassie. It's a huge step toward criminal RICO charges. The realization was potent. Cassie wasn't just a greedy HOA president. She was a repeat federal environmental offender. While she was busy playing the victim on the Seattle Morning Show, she was potentially exposing herself and her husband to mandatory prison time. The financial house of cards my senior water right was the key to unlocking their entire financial structure. Amanda Cross, my environmental attorney, explained the simple, brutal reality of Western real estate finance. Mortgage contingency. Construction loans for luxury developments are massive, complex instruments. Banks like Cascadian Heights lender require ironclad guarantees that the property has permanent, legal, and viable water access. No water, no loan. The loan agreements Brad Vance secured for the $40 million development were explicitly contingent on their guaranteed access to the Tassel River water. The irony was delicious. They had stolen my water to make their land valuable. But the moment my $1918 senior water right was legally asserted, their entire development would become financially underwater. The senior water right gambit. If the courts affirmed my senior right, which predated all municipal, residential, and HOA claims, the water diversion would be deemed illegal, and the water would legally revert to me. This would instantly put the HOA in breach of contract with their lenders, triggering a massive $18 million default clause that allowed the banks to demand immediate full repayment of the construction loans. This was the weapon that bypassed the zoning board and the corrupt local judge. This weapon hit them where they lived, their wallet and their debt liability. Cassie's panic and my sister's resolve. Cassie, realizing the net was tightening, shifted tactics from public shaming to private bribery. She offered me a desperation bid, $600,000 cash, no questions asked, with a 48-hour deadline. It was a ludicrously low offer for a $1.2 million property, but it signaled complete panic. She needed the water rights issue to disappear before the federal agencies moved. When I refused, she took the crueler step of flying to Boston to approach my well-meaning but naive Aunt Beatrice, weaving a false narrative about my troubled veteran brother and his unstable state. This move backfired spectacularly. My sister, Sarah, called me immediately, laughing through her fury. Ethan, this crazy woman in expensive workout clothes just tried to pull the troubled veteran sob story on Aunt Beatrice. I told her if she ever contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI for harassment. You're fine. Jake, go flood their golf course. Sarah's unwavering support was the emotional armor I needed. The coalition grows, legal and environmental firepower. While Cassie was alienating her own family, I was cementing my alliances. Amanda Cross, the strategist. She leveraged the growing evidence to form a powerful coalition of the injured. She filed affidavits from the 8 families Cassie had previously displaced, turning individual grievances into evidence of a large-scale, systematic predatory scheme. The historical record, Mr. Rodriguez, senior rights holder, and Maria Chen, displaced farmer, provided irrefutable historical documentation. Mr. Rodriguez provided his family's $1905 water use logs. Maria Chen provided aerial photographs from the 1940s dollars showing the natural creek flow, proving the HOA's new creek bed was fake. The Audubon Society, the moral authority, The Audubon Society and the Sierra Club officially joined the alliance. Their involvement transformed the case's narrative from a rancher versus HOA feud into a community versus corporate environmental destruction battle. They specialized in public pressure and confirmed that the creek diversion had destroyed critical nesting habitats for protected species, escalating the case's environmental profile. Killing protected wildlife while committing water theft is a guaranteed federal conviction trigger. The engineering finalized, the spillway solution during my final reconnaissance run under the cover of a midnight mist. I discovered the beautiful logic of Papa Eli's design. The 1935 weir wasn't just built to hold water. It was built to control the release of water. The hydraulic spillway system was designed for precisely this moment. A controlled discharge to restore the natural flow patterns and prevent catastrophic flooding elsewhere in the watershed. My final calculations confirmed the perfect balance. Releasing 3.5 million gallons over 4 hours would not destroy the foundations of the homes, but would definitively prove to the EPA and any judge that the HOA's development was built directly in the historical flood channel. The HOA's illegal concrete barriers were the true threat to the community, as they prevented the natural flow of water, leading to upstream backups. My controlled release was an emergency environmental restoration, a lawful obligation under my 1935 deed. The technical, legal, and political pressures were all converging. The weather forecast was confirming the arrival of the heavy September rains. Cassie's last-ditch effort to permanently block the original riverbed with concrete gave me the final necessary justification for the imminent operation. I was no longer waiting for justice. I was about to engineer it. The final defining piece of legal armor was hidden in plain sight, buried beneath decades of bureaucratic negligence in the Chelan County archives. The discovery of the 1918 senior water right gave me the right to the water. The discovery of the original covenant gave me the legal obligation, the mandate to act. This was the difference between winning a lawsuit and executing a lawful, essential duty. The foundational text, the 1935 agricultural covenant. During a third grueling deep dive at the courthouse, fueled by lukewarm coffee and pure obsession, I found it. A brittle, half-forgotten document misfiled behind a stack of $1979 property tax assessments. It was the Agricultural Flood Management Covenant filed by Papa Eli in 1935, concurrent with his USACE and USGS consultations for the weir construction. The language of the covenant, drafted in the unyielding legal terms of the Depression era, was devastatingly simple and powerful. The weir operator shall, in perpetuity, maintain natural seasonal flow patterns of the Tassel River tributary to preserve downstream agricultural water rights and mitigate seasonal flood risk across the watershed. This document wasn't just old. It was a deed restriction and a legal requirement tied directly to the land. It superseded local ordinances. No HOA rule or city council zoning change enacted decades later could invalidate this covenant. It established an obligation, not a choice. The law required me to maintain those seasonal flow patterns. By opening the spillway, I wasn't committing an act of revenge. I was fulfilling a standing legal duty. It framed the crime. Cassie and Brad's illegal diversion and concrete barriers were direct violations of a federally acknowledged covenant designed to protect the entire watershed, making their actions an affront to the entire legal and ecological history of the valley. This agricultural covenant was the legal green light for the controlled flood. Amanda Cross confirmed the tactical significance immediately. Ethan, they thought the silence of the last 80 years meant that document was dead. They're wrong. You are not only justified in opening that weir, you are legally required to do so to prevent further covenant violations and ecological harm. The federal fraud triangulation, insurance and banking. Lies, while the covenant gave us the power to act. Amanda's parallel investigation into the HOA's financial filings provided the absolute guarantee of their criminal collapse, hitting the Vance's wallets and personal liberty simultaneously. Insurance fraud, the mail fraud crime. Amanda's banking contacts and my fraud research yielded the smoking gun. The Cascadian Heights HOA and Vance Development had secured over $47 million in property and construction insurance policies. The applications for these policies contained flat-out lies. Lie 1. claiming zero history of seasonal flooding risk on the property. Directly contradicted by USAC 100-year floodplain maps. Lie 2, claiming the permanent creek diversion has been approved by all relevant federal and state agencies. Directly contradicted by Tony Russo's EPA investigation. This is the fourth power punch. When you use the U.S. Postal Service or electronic wires, which insurance claims are, to transmit false information to fraudulently secure money, the insurance coverage, that constitutes federal mail fraud and wire fraud. These are serious felony offenses with mandatory prison sentences, bypassing the jurisdiction of the local corruptible Chelan County court system entirely. This guaranteed federal law enforcement would be involved, regardless of the local judge's loyalty to Brad Vance. Banking fraud, the loan default trigger. The construction loans were secured based on fraudulent environmental assessments that claimed the illegal creek diversion was a temporary construction measure and that water would be returned to its natural course upon completion. Amanda confirmed that the instant the court or the EPA recognized my senior water right and compelled the water back into its natural channel via my spillway operation, the HOA would be in immediate default on its loan covenants. The banks could demand immediate repayment of the $18 million construction loans. The Vance's entire financial house of cards, their assets, their development, and their political capital was based on the fraudulent pretense of having secure water. The controlled flow of water would now become the definitive factor in their financial ruin. The ecocidal crime, destruction of protected species. Tony Russo's preliminary EPA findings brought the final, emotionally resonant layer to the conspiracy: pure environmental destruction. The Guadalupe Bass Massacre. The Tassel River was home to the Guadalupe bass, a sensitive, protected species monitored by state wildlife agencies. Tony confirmed that the illegal diversion had dramatically dropped the water temperature, flow rate, and oxygenation in the old riverbed, leading to a documented fish kill that wiped out the entire local population. The report, initially documented by the Texas Parks and Wildlife, had somehow gotten lost in Brad Vance's municipal office before it could be officially filed. A clear obstruction of justice. They weren't just stealing water, they were engaging in an ecocidal crime. Ecosystem collapse. The Audubon Society further documented that the sudden drop in the water table had decimated the fragile wetland habitat surrounding the diversion zone, destroying critical nesting grounds for migratory bird species. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. The Vance's actions were not just an aggressive land grab. They represented a systemic, criminal pattern of sacrificing protected ecosystems and violating federal law for private profit. The legacy of $1980, duty before profit, as the weight of the investigation settled. I found one final, deeply personal document: Papa Eli's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. One entry, dated $1980, encapsulated the entire moral framework of the fight. Opened spillway today. Helped the Rodriguez farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about our family's profit. It was about community service. Helping downstream neighbors survive droughts and managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those words, the decision crystallized. Cassie Vance had stolen more than land or water. She had attempted to destroy the very spirit of community cooperation that my grandfather had built over $45 years. Engineering analysis confirmed that the HOA's diversion was not just a crime, but a looming safety disaster. The diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard that would endanger the new homeowners themselves during the heavy rains. The only way to ensure safety and restore environmental order was the controlled release. Standing before the old hydraulic controls, holding the covenant, the moral and legal necessity hit me like a physical force. This was no longer about revenge against an HOA. It was about restoring the natural, lawful order that had sustained this community for generations. The rain was coming. It was time to honor Papa Eli's legacy and open those gates. I was legally and morally obligated to flood the valley to save the creek. The time for research, legal filings, and documentation was over. The Agricultural Flood Management Covenant gave me the legal mandate. The senior water right provided the justification, and the EPA investigation provided the federal cover. I was no longer a lone veteran fighting an HOA. I was the commander of an environmental restoration operation. This was not revenge. This was a meticulously planned hydro-tactical operation, H2O TAC, executed with military precision, legal protection, and community consensus. The Joint Task Force, coordinating the alliance. The success of the operation hinged on the flawless coordination of the Tassel River Conservation Alliance. I structured the team like a military joint task force, assigning specialized roles to maximize impact and control the narrative. Command and Control, C2, Ethan Kaelin, the operator. Role, Final Decision Maker, Engineering Execution, and On-Site Security. Mission, Open the spillway gates at the precise calculated time and maintain controlled flow. Protocols, Established encrypted radio communication with the perimeter team, implemented detailed safety checklists for the weir mechanisms, and compiled the final, decisive evidence package, photos, flowcharts, and the $1935 covenant. Legal Operations, Lego P. Amanda Cross, The Shield. Role, Provide immediate legal defense. Preemptive filings and crisis communication coordination. Mission, Ensure the operation remains strictly legal by framing the spillway opening as a mandated agricultural water rights restoration and an emergency environmental intervention, a duty, not an attack. Preparation, Filed an emergency motion with the Federal District Court, citing the $1935 covenant as legal justification for the action, preemptively challenging any restraining order Brad Vance might attempt through his corrupt local judge. She also prepared whistleblower complaints and fraud evidence for immediate submission to banking and insurance regulators concurrent with the operation. Federal Liaison, FedEL. Tony Russo, the Cavalry. Role, Coordinate the arrival and presence of federal law enforcement, EPA and potentially FBI. Mission, Guarantee that federal agents are on site at the moment of the spillway opening. Their presence would instantly transform any attempt by the HOA's hired security or local police to interfere into a federal offense, obstruction of a federal investigation. Intelligence. Tony confirmed the EPA investigators, led by Agent Sarah Kim, would arrive at 8 a.m., 2 hours after the planned initial release, providing perfect timing for them to document the natural flow restoration in real time. Ground Truth and Media, GTM. The Rodriguez and Chen families' role, provide historical testimony, community credibility, and media amplification. Mission, control the narrative at the ground level. Mr. Rodriguez was set to give an emotional, on-camera statement about the restoration of his family's $1905 water rights. Maria Chen utilized her network to ensure local reporters and the Audubon Society were present to document the environmental benefits and the return of wildlife. Their moral authority would instantly counter Cassie's unstable veteran narrative. The engineering execution, precision hydrology. My $12 years in the SEALs specializing in logistics engineering meant the physical operation would be flawless. The controlled release was a product of meticulous calculation, not emotion. Flow calculations, the golden numbers. Total volume for restoration, 3.5 million gallons required to refill the natural creek bed and ditches. Dam capacity, $4.2 million gallons post-seasonal rain. Target flow rate, calculated to mimic the Tassel River's historical seasonal peak flow, 50 cubic feet per second. The few documented in Papa Eli's journals. This would prove the flow was natural, not destructive. Safety margin. The release was calculated to stay well below the $100 a year flood level documented by USX, ensuring no structural damage to any legal property, but guaranteeing that water would flow directly into the illegal foundations built in the old flood channel. B. The release plan and timing T 24 hours. The warning. Posted clear. Highly visible warning signs along the lower riverbed in English and Spanish, stating, emergency weir maintenance commencing, restoration of natural water flow. This satisfied safety protocols and preempted claims of reckless endangerment. T1. Already dawn setup. Final equipment checks. Service the $1935 hydraulic systems, ensuring the gates open smoothly. Set up encrypted drone surveillance for legal aerial documentation of the event. H hour, 6 a.m., the whisper. Initial, minimal opening of the spillway gates to 25% capacity. This slow, controlled release would allow the water to quietly flow into the original, parched riverbed, demonstrating that the intent was restoration, not chaos. T+4 hours, 10 a.m., peak flow. Gradually increase the flow to $100 per $1. Capacity matching the $50 Wartext ECFS at natural flow as the EPA and media arrive, showcasing the restored natural water cycle in action. The economic warfare escalation Amanda ensured that the physical water flow would trigger the Vance's financial collapse. The timing was crucial. Preemptive strike on insurance. Amanda transmitted the compiled evidence of federal mail fraud to the Texas Insurance Commission and the major carriers just before the operation. The goal was to have the HOA's policies frozen or nullified before the water started flowing, ensuring that any perceived damage would not be covered. Triggering loan default. She prepared to submit the 1918 senior water right and the 1935 covenant to the banks the moment the spillway opened. This would formally trigger the breach of contract clause on the $18 million construction loan, forcing the banks to demand immediate repayment. Knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure, multiple federal agencies and private financial regulators hitting a target simultaneously, is often more effective than an individual lawsuit, forcing the defendants to fight on too many fronts. Final preparations. A siege mentality. Knowing Cassie's psychology, I anticipated a desperate, physical response. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential $72-hour siege. Amanda filed protective court orders preventing any interference with lawful, covenant-mandated dam operations, essentially providing legal protection for the weir controls. I established secondary communications, knowing they would attempt to cut power and cell service. As I stood at the weir controls before dawn, the air was still intense. The weather forecast confirmed heavy rain arriving in 48 hours, a natural cover and justification. Federal investigators would arrive in 3 hours. Cassie Vance was scheduled for her morning show appearance in 4 hours. The timing was perfect. Dawn would not just bring the morning, it would bring justice, flowing precisely where it belonged. As the clock ticked down to H hour, 6 a.m., and the scheduled spillway operation, Cassie and Brad Vance realized their bureaucratic warfare had failed. The legal pressure from Amanda Cross and the imminent arrival of the EPA, coordinated by Tony Russo, triggered a predictable, panicked shift to reckless criminal action. Their desperation became my final tactical advantage. The sabotage attempt. Criminal conspiracy. Cassie's first move was straight out of the corporate warfare playbook: physical sabotage. She outsourced this attempt to the same private security mercenaries who had been harassing my perimeter. These weren't rent-a-cops. They were ex-military wannabes hired to project aggressive authority. My military-grade trail cameras, installed near the historic Weir control house, caught them red-handed at 2 a.m. 2 operatives, wearing tactical vests and blacked-out gear, were caught attempting to sabotage the hydraulic controls. Their goal was to either jam the gears permanently or, more dangerously, introduce contaminants like quickset concrete mix into the system. The latter was designed not just to stop the release, but to turn the operation into a genuine disaster, backing up the water and causing an uncontrolled flood that would validate Cassie's claims. However, Tony Russo had anticipated this escalation. He had tipped off the sheriff's department about credible threats of organized vandalism against federally acknowledged water infrastructure. Deputy Davies, who had been quietly tracking the Vance's increasingly brazen behavior, was waiting in the shadows. The moment the mercenaries started tampering with the heavy iron gate controls, Davies and his team moved in. The arrest was swift and clean. The operatives claimed that they were protecting community infrastructure from a troubled veteran, fell apart when they couldn't explain the bag of quickset concrete in their tactical kit. This incident provided crucial evidence, proof of criminal intent, conspiracy, and malice aforethought. The media blitz, weaponizing veteran status with the sabotage attempt neutralized, Cassie pivoted back to her strongest weapon, propaganda. She executed a perfectly orchestrated media blitz designed to create maximum doubt about my sanity and motives just hours before the operation. She appeared on the Seattle Morning Show, dressed in somber black, shedding carefully controlled tears. Veterans need mental health support, not weapons. she pleaded to the camera, using the most toxic form of performative sympathy. This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan, and now he is threatening to wash away the homes of innocent families. The expert testimony, Brad Vance, leveraging his title as a city engineer, provided expert testimony, warning the public about the imminent risk of a catastrophic dam failure, conveniently omitting that my weir had passed every safety inspection for $80 years, and that the real danger came from the development he built in the floodplain, the slander. Her online campaign reached new lows. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, making the malicious claim that I had expressed suicide threats and required an involuntary psychiatric hold. This was a desperate, cruel attempt to have me legally removed from my property hours before H hour, ensuring the operation couldn't proceed. The legal counterpunch: corrupt justice. The most significant preemptive strike came from the Vance's corrupted political network. Brad fast-tracked an emergency restraining order, TRO, hearing for 6 a.m., the exact moment of my scheduled initial release. The hearing was set before Judge Henry Walsh, a known golf partner of Brad's who had received $25,000 in campaign contributions from Vance Development. The fix was clearly in. If they couldn't stop the water physically, they would stop it through a corrupt judicial fiat. Amanda's defense, Amanda Cross, immediately filed an emergency motion for recusal, citing the judge's clear conflict of interest and submitting evidence of Brad's campaign contributions. While she knew the motion would likely be denied by Walsh, the filing served as a public record and a clear warning. Any ruling against me would be viewed as judicial corruption, providing grounds for immediate federal appeal and investigation. The physical confrontation, the human shield. Knowing the legal system was being manipulated, Cassie implemented her final, most cynical maneuver, the human shield blockade. She rallied $40 HOA residents, positioning them at my property line with coolers, folding chairs, and their ubiquitous "Year Protect Our Kids" signs. They planned to live stream the spillway opening, framing themselves as suburban families facing down a dangerous aggressor. The optics were designed to be impossible for law enforcement to manage. Suburban mothers with children versus armed police and a veteran. But the Shadow Alliance was prepared. Miguel Rodriguez and Maria Chen, using their community network, organized a counter-demonstration. $50 local farmers and families arrived to support the agricultural water restoration. They brought historical photos of the thriving river and distributed informational leaflets citing the 1918 senior water right. Representatives from the Audubon Society and the Sierra Club were also present, transforming the scene into a clash between community water rights and corporate fraud. The final warning in the VA. Visit the coordinated pressure peaked in the final hour before H hour. The fire chief's warning. Fire Chief Martinez, the honest official Brad had tried to manipulate, arrived at my gate at 5 a.m. He bypassed the HOA blockade. "Jake," he said privately, "Brad just used his city council powers to declare your property an imminent public hazard, authorizing me to intervene with the fire department to secure the dam structure. You've got maybe 90 minutes before they force my hand. Make it count." The VA social worker. At 5:30 a.m., the VA social worker, Ms. Sharma, arrived, legally bound to execute the involuntary psychiatric hold order based on Cassie's fabricated claims. I had to spend 15 tense minutes with her, demonstrating absolute calm, competence, and clarity regarding the legal and engineering realities. I provided her with the $1935 covenant and the EPA contact information, proving my actions were not delusional revenge but lawful duty. The emotional climax arrived with a call from my sister, Sarah, her voice breaking. "I can't lose my brother to this. Ethan, please, I know what Pops would want." For a moment, the weight of the moral burden was crushing, but then I looked at the old iron controls of the spillway, remembering Papa Eli's final entry. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. My duty was clear. The Vances had forced this confrontation, and they had chosen the field of battle. Justice, like water, would find its way home. The atmosphere at 5:55 a.m. was a volatile mix of pre-dawn chill, tension, and the frantic energy of Cassie Vance's final desperate blockade. The 40 HOA residents stood at the property line holding their signs and phones, ready to live stream the act of domestic terror. The $50 Tassel River Conservation Alliance members, farmers, environmentalists, and neighbors stood opposite them, silently waiting. I had just secured the release of the VA social worker, Ms. Sharma, who left with a binder full of legal documents and the assurance that my actions were not delusional but mandated by a $1935 federal covenant. The clock hit 5:58 a.m. H hour. The whisper and the roar, 6 a.m. I ignored the screaming from the HOA blockade. My focus was on the 3 heavy iron control wheels of the spillway. They hadn't been turned under active water pressure in $42 years. I applied the oil, checked the pressure gauges, and, recalling Papa Eli's precise instructions from his journal, began the slow, deliberate turn at 6:02 a.m., with the rising sun painting the sky a fierce orange. The initial gate opened, just 25% dollar. The sound was not the catastrophic roar Cassie had predicted. It was a deep, resonant rumble followed by a magnificent whisper, the sound of water finding a channel long denied. For the first time in $18 months, the Tassel River tributary began to flow into its original, parched bed. The sight was emotionally overwhelming. Mr. Rodriguez, the elderly cherry farmer, dropped to his knees beside the newly flowing water, cupping the clear stream in his weathered hands. The water, it remembers, he whispered, tears streaming down his face as the water that had fed his grandfather's orchard flowed past him once again. This singular, profound moment of environmental and personal justice was captured by Maria Chen and instantly uploaded to the Alliance's social media channels, reframing the entire narrative. The media implosion. Cassie's narrative cracks Cassie Vance, whose face was already tightly composed for her upcoming satellite interview, immediately went into hysterics, her corporate mask shattering. She screamed at the federal agents who were now arriving in official vehicles. "Arrest him! Arrest the terrorist! He's flooding our homes!" she shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch of desperation that was impossible to maintain. EPA agent Sarah Kim, a calm, unflappable woman, stepped between Cassie and me. "Ma'am, the gentleman is operating a federally acknowledged agricultural flood control system. He has a legal obligation to maintain seasonal flow patterns. You are interfering with an official environmental restoration." Agent Kim's cool, factual tone instantly neutralized Cassie's emotional performance. The live broadcast backfires. The local news helicopters arrived and began broadcasting the operation live. The reporter on the ground, expecting a destructive flood, was confused. "Wait, the water is flowing precisely where the old maps show the riverbed was. The houses are fine." Cassie's voice, captured live, now sounded like irrational panic, directly contradicting the visual evidence of the gently flowing water. Her prophecy of mass destruction had failed. The interception. When Cassie tried to hijack the interview with the Seattle Times reporter, claiming I was using military knowledge to attack civilians, the reporter simply asked, "Ma'am, since the water is flowing in the original 1905 riverbed, can you explain exactly how this constitutes an attack?" The failure to logically explain her narrative was the end of her public credibility, legal and technical validation, the ironclad evidence, the U. Operation gained absolute legal and technical validation as federal officials moved in to document the scene. EPA confirmation, EPA. Agent Kim's team immediately set up monitoring equipment at the weir and along the restored channel. Tony Russo was on hand to document the findings. The EPA's official report confirmed natural flow. The controlled release flow rate, $50 from text $0.09, matched the historical natural seasonal patterns, proving the operation was restorative, not destructive. Violation confirmed. The water flowed directly against the illegal concrete barriers installed by the HOA, providing irrefutable federal evidence that the HOA had knowingly obstructed a natural waterway and created an environmental hazard. This turned the physical act of opening the spillway into the official federal documentation of the HOA's crime. Insurance collapse triggered. While the water was still flowing, Amanda Cross, stationed at a nearby cafe with secure communications, executed the final step of the economic warfare. She simultaneously submitted the $1918 senior water right and the EPA's initial findings to the HOA's primary insurance carriers and the State Insurance Commission. The impact was immediate. The Insurance Commission issued a temporary suspension of all HOA development insurance policies. The construction company received a cease and desist order from the state. Without valid insurance against environmental risks or structural integrity, all work on Cascadian Heights stopped instantly. The financial house of cards was collapsing. The final, desperate gambit Brad Vance, in a final insane act of desperation, attempted to sabotage the legal process again. He called his construction foreman and ordered 3 concrete mixer trucks to drive onto the site and accidentally spill their loads across the newly flowing riverbed, a crude attempt to physically stop the water and ruin the EPA's evidence. The trucks were intercepted by federal agents who, with the backing of Agent Kim, immediately arrested the drivers for interfering with a federal environmental investigation, a direct felony charge. This final act of lawlessness cemented the Vance's criminal intent. The sweetest confrontation, the flow stabilized, successfully restoring water to Maria Chen's garden irrigation and 3 downstream stock ponds belonging to farmers. The local diner owner arrived with free coffee and homemade kolaches for everyone, declaring, "My daddy farmed here. This is how it should be." The political fallout was swift. City Councilman Martinez, finally free of Brad Vance's influence, arrived at the scene and publicly demanded Brad's immediate resignation, announcing to the gathered media, "This corruption has ended. The city will no longer be held hostage by financial deceit." Cassie, realizing her multi-million-dollar investment was worthless without the fraudulent water access, stormed toward me screaming across the restored creek, "You've destroyed everything. 35 families are ruined." My response was calm, audible to every microphone, and final, "No, ma'am. I restored everything. Your families can buy water rights legally, just like everyone else has to. You just can't steal them." As she sped away in her white Tesla, threatening lawsuits that would never materialize, the air filled not with shouts of anger, but with cheers from the farmers and the natural sound of the Tassel River running free. The media narrative had officially flipped. Environmental groups hail veteran for restoring stolen river. The justice, like the water, had found its true level. The courtroom of Judge Henry Walsh at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a military transport. Media crews, farmers, environmentalists, HOA residents, and federal agents filled every seat, creating an atmosphere charged with anticipation. This was not merely a legal hearing. It was a community reckoning. Cassie Vance arrived with an expensive army, 3 high-powered Houston attorneys, expert witnesses flown in from across the state, and enough legal firepower to challenge a small government. She had traded her aggressive Lululemon attire for a conservative black dress and pearls, attempting to portray the role of the concerned, victimized community leader. I walked in with Amanda Cross, wearing a simple button-down shirt and Papa Eli's worn cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is simply being authentic. The trial, contradicting narratives. The gallery was divided. On the left, a handful of staunch HOA supporters clutched their "Protect Our Kids" signs. On the right, the farmers and the Tassel River Conservation Alliance stood with weathered hands and determined faces. The prosecution, Cassie's side. Cassie's lead attorney opened with theatrical flair, presenting blurred photos of muddy construction sites and claiming $3.5 million in flood damage from my spillway operation. They called a psychiatrist who, despite never meeting me, was eager to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based solely on newspaper clippings and Cassie's slander. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, pointing at me dramatically, "this disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He has turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The narrative was simple: chaos, vengeance, and danger. The defense, the truth, Amanda Cross, was surgical. She didn't argue against their damage claims. She established a higher legal authority. "The covenant is king." Amanda presented the $1935 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant, proving that my spillway operation was not a crime, but a legal, covenant-mandated duty to protect the watershed. Federal authority, EPA agent Sarah Kim, took the stand. Her testimony was concise and devastating. She confirmed that my operation had restored natural water flow patterns and that the current water level matched 80 years of historical seasonal data. There was no actual flood damage. The water was simply flowing where it belonged. Tony Russo's testimony, Tony, wearing his EPA enforcement uniform, detailed the federal findings. The HOA development had violated 3 separate federal environmental laws, committed systematic insurance fraud, and destroyed protected wildlife habitat. Judge Walsh visibly squirmed. He was forced to confront the reality that his political loyalty to Brad Vance was putting him at risk of federal scrutiny for obstruction of justice. The collapse. Brad Vance on the stand. The breaking point came when Amanda called Brad Vance as a hostile witness. Under oath, Brad was forced to admit, he fast-tracked the zoning changes while I was deployed. He held a controlling financial stake in the construction company, benefiting from the illegal zoning changes. Then, Amanda played the recorded phone conversation between Brad and his foreman, captured during the height of the spillway operation, where Brad was screaming about destroying millions in property value and openly discussing illegal methods to block the water. Brad completely lost control, yelling, "This is a federal setup," and attempting to storm out. His own unedited words, recorded and presented in open court, proved the conspiracy. Better than any prosecutor could. The moral gravity was provided by the community. Mr. Rodriguez described 3 generations of farming being systematically destroyed by the theft of his water, his voice shaking with generational pain. Maria Chen showed photographs of her family garden, lush before the diversion and withered afterward. Fire Chief Martinez testified that the spillway operation was professionally executed with 0 safety violations. The judgment and the fallout. When I finally took the stand, I spoke directly to the judge, holding Papa Eli's journal. "Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I restored a creek that was stolen from my family and this community for 80 years. I fulfilled my legal obligation to the land." The final blow came when Amanda presented the documentation of Cassie's previous $3.5 million EPA fine. The federal prosecutor immediately stood and announced that based on the evidence presented, a criminal investigation into interstate water fraud conspiracy, RICO charges, was now underway. Targeting Cassie and Brad Vance, Judge Walsh had nowhere left to hide. He issued his ruling. Restraining orders denied. He denied all HOA requests for restraining orders against me. Spillway operation vindicated. He ruled that the operation was legal and beneficial, upholding the validity of the 1935 covenant order to cease. He ordered the HOA to cease all work and interference with federal environmental investigators. As federal agents immediately escorted a stunned Brad Vance from the courthouse to serve him with warrants, Cassie fled the building, refusing all media comment. The Tassel River Conservation Alliance erupted in cheers. The justice had flowed, and the victory was definitive. The Legacy Project, Restoration and Prosperity. 6 months later, the Tassel River was singing again. The consequences for the Vances were catastrophic and proportional to their crimes. Brad Vance pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Cassandra Vance faced $9.5 million in civil penalties and filed for immediate bankruptcy. Her name and career were permanently destroyed by the RICO investigation. Vance Development paid $15 million in EPA fines and was permanently banned from all federal contract work. The HOA, the Cascadian Heights HOA, dissolved completely. Residents formed a new association focused on environmental stewardship instead of suburban tyranny. The victory for the community was restorative, financial restoration. My property value, once threatened by condemnation, was restored to $1.8 million after the federal environmental designation made it more valuable as protected conservation land. The gift. The $450,000 settlement I received from the insurance fraud investigation was used to buy back Maria Chen's family farm at a tax auction, returning it to her family debt-free. Environmental restoration created more value than the development ever could. A new flow, the community's future, the Tassel River. Watershed transformed. Ecological success, protected Guadalupe. Bass populations recovered. The Audubon Society documented 12 bird species returning to the restored wetland habitat, leading to the creek being designated a critical wildlife corridor. The Pops Morrison legacy. I renovated Papa Eli's farmhouse using sustainable techniques. And my sister Sarah moved back from California to help manage our growing agritourism business. The scholarship. We established the Elijah Kaelin Environmental Scholarship for rural students studying water management. Maria Chen's daughter, Elena, was the first recipient and is now studying environmental engineering at the University of Washington. The ripple effects spread. Environmental groups across the Pacific Northwest cited the Tassel River model to challenge illegal diversions statewide. I became an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA overreach. The annual River Days Festival now celebrates restoration and community resilience. My favorite part is watching children swim in the free-flowing creek where luxury homes were supposed to be built, splashing in water that flows freely because a community stood together. Every Sunday, I visit Papa Eli's grave and bring a mason jar of creek water just as he used to do. "Thanks, Pops," I tell him. "The river's singing again, just like you said it would." The Tassel River Conservation Trust now owns development rights to the entire watershed, guaranteeing permanent protection. The victory was about more than a lawsuit. It was about protecting the land and the law for future generations. If you're fighting HOA overreach, environmental destruction, or bureaucratic bullying, don't give up. Document everything. Find allies. And remember, the law is on your side when you're protecting the land. Drop a comment and tell me your HOA nightmare story. I read every single one and reply when I can, because these fights are easier when we support each other. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about communities fighting back and winning. Water finds a way, justice finds a way, and communities that fight together win together. The Tassel River flows free, y'all, and it always will.